Live streaming, as it were. All right, so I want to do a live stream this week, which is still new for me. So I appreciate anyone who's watching this for bearing with me through the stumbling process of learning something new. But I have my friend Leslie Elliott here, host of the Radical Center on YouTube and now on all audio podcast platforms. I'm really glad that Leslie was able to join me at the last minute because it has been a doozy of a week. And I wanted to sort of decompress with a friend and colleague about the latest attacks on my license as a therapist. So maybe I'll just sort of start from the beginning without further ado. But let me just make sure if I go to Twitter for a second and I click on the link that I just posted, I just want to make sure that it actually leads somewhere that people can go. So, oh, no, the second link.
Playing with live streaming
Oh, yeah.
myself. It's kind of,
Okay.
there's a lot to figure out with the technology.
Oh, you know what I just realized? It is working, but it still has the same cover art as my last live stream.
Oh, yeah.
So, which is like it's false advertising. This is not a live stream with a trans Oregonian. This is for Leslie Elliott. So that was last time. But it looked like one person was watching as of when I looked. So thank you, one person, for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and experiment with the screen share feature, which, like I said, I'm not great at figuring out how to do this, but I'm going to go ahead and just share my whole screen and pivot over to the tweet that started this whole debacle. So this is from a few days ago, earlier this week on March 28th, a therapist I had never heard of before and had no history of interaction with, who is a blue check verified account using his name publicly and his credentials. So as you can see, Brian Harnsberger, PsyD in Massachusetts, posted on Twitter just sharing these for no particular reason whatsoever. And then shared presumably a link to one of my tweets, although it's not displaying. And then he clearly Googled me, pulled up my NPI number, which is a National Provider Identification Number, which is sort of a universal for any kind of therapist or healthcare provider, and a screenshot where it says he Googled Oregon therapist license complaint. And then you can see it highlights how to file a complaint. And that kicked this whole thing off.
So he's
So I'm going
clearly
to
inviting people to
stop
complain and making it easy for them.
sharing. So I don't know what just happened because I was trying to record and then I was trying to stop the screen share, and unfortunately instead it stopped it stopped the recording. So now I don't know if I don't know if this is working, but let me just sort of start over in case that started the whole video over. So to recap, thanks Leslie for your patience, and thanks to those who are watching who understand I'm not great at live streaming. But I'm just going to share my screen again. I'm going to have to share the entire screen, and it's going to look wonky for a second, and then I'm going to share this tweet from earlier this week that kicked off all the drama. On March 28th, a therapist I'd never met before, never had any interaction with, named Brian Harnsberger, a licensed psychologist in Massachusetts, tweeted, just sharing these for no particular reason whatsoever, with a link to my NPI number, which identifies me as a mental health professional in the system, and then how to file a complaint against an Oregon therapist. With a link to one of my tweets, and you can't even see which tweet it is because of someone's settings somewhere. I don't really understand why I can't see it. These are all screenshots that were shared with me from people with different accounts because Brian blocked me before kicking off this whole thing. Now, hopefully I'm not going to make the same mistake I am again. I'm going to press stop sharing, and we're not stopping the recording. So I'm done with the screen share. But that happened this week. So just to recap, I had no history of interaction with this person. He is a licensed professional psychologist across the country from me. He found something I said on the internet that he didn't like, and then essentially, in a very thinly veiled passive aggressive manner, invited his 30,000 plus Twitter followers to file a complaint against me. Um, and so, just starting with that, Leslie, what is your reaction to the series of events?
Well, it sounds like he's just kind of throwing a rock through a window there. He's going to, block you so that you can't respond, and then he just paved the way for anybody to be able to report you without really going into any detail. It seems very shady. Seems like there could have been a conversation had prior to this if he had a problem with something that you were talking about. Or he could have even laid out the case more explicitly for people, like what exactly are you being accused of here? And it doesn't seem like he's going into that. Was
Right.
there more to it? Is there something more? Was there a specific incident, or is it just a general complaint about you and the topics that you've been talking about?
So strangely, because of the display settings, even though it looks like he's sharing one of my tweets, um, I actually, with whoever screenshotted this, can't see which of my tweets he was sharing, or maybe he was sharing that like someone had shared my tweet and that person has blocked me. I don't really know, but I can reasonably presume that this was in reaction to a tweet I made the day before that went viral. So, and this is regarding the Nashville shooting with Audrey Hale.
Mm-hmm.
And I can actually go ahead and, you know what, let me go ahead and find that because I have nothing to hide. It's just going to take me a minute to pull that up. Let me see. I'm searching Twitter for that very tweet. Oh, yeah. Okay. So this tweet went viral. It got 250,000 views. Let me go ahead and do a screen share again of this tab. So now we're looking at, oops, those are my messages, at my Twitter together. So here it says, so I've been pretty busy today, but I'm gathering from a quick glance at Twitter that a woman who believed she was a man murdered 6 innocent children and elders today, and that this woman took testosterone, a mood-altering drug known to increase aggression that is nonetheless given freely to people without mental health evaluations. Did I get that right? I went on to say, funny how libs want more mental health screenings for firearms, but they don't want mental health screenings for people who seek to take mood-altering, aggression-inducing drugs. Then I said, detransitioned woman at LaCroix, which is Helena Kirshner, has spoken about how radically testosterone altered her mood and behavior. She became aggressive and impulsive and was hospitalized, yet no medical professionals noted the likely connection between the drug and her mood and behavior. And I linked to my conversation with Helena on episode 8. And then there's some follow-up tweets that I made days later about how this has gone viral, and I shared a beautiful apology from Soad Tabrizi to sort of taking responsibility for what we've gotten wrong in our field. Stop sharing, go back to... so I presume it was that most of my tweets do not get 250,000 views. That was getting a lot of retweets and a lot of sort of hate quote tweets from people. But I actually stand behind what I said. First of all, I acknowledged that I hadn't even gotten the whole story yet. I said, I've been busy today. Is this what I'm picking up on? And then I pointed out that there may be mood altering drugs and a history of mental health problems involved. And right now there's a lot of debate happening online about we want to see the manifesto that Audrey Hale ostensibly wrote. And a lot of us would like to see an autopsy and like to know what drugs she might have been taking. I think it's a fair question because these are powerful compounds, and female bodies are not accustomed to the level of testosterone that many trans-identified females are taking. So I thought it was fair to pose this question, and it's my understanding that based on that alone, this person thought that I should be reported to my licensing board. And so that raises a lot of questions for me because it's like you said, he could have had a conversation. I think when you as a therapist have a concern about a colleague's behavior, now I don't know the laws in Massachusetts, but I do know the sort of general ethical principles that most of us have been taught since grad school. And maybe, actually, I'd love to hear from you, Leslie, if these are still being taught in grad school, because The sort of codes of conduct I was taught in grad school and all throughout my training after that were that basically if you have a concern about a colleague's behavior and you think it's not just a personal clash or a difference of opinion over something that's between you, but something that could impact client care or that person's judgment as a clinician, the first thing you should do is bring it to them.
Mm-hmm.
That's the code of conduct. And then if you don't feel safe for a legitimate reason, like there's something about that person's behavior that gives you reason to fear your security with that, or if you try to bring it up with them and they escalate and you don't feel like it goes well, then you might bring it up to a supervisor in a shared environment, or eventually there are certain lines that could get crossed where you bring it to a licensing board.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that what he's modeling here, now I don't know if he submitted a complaint against me or if he just encouraged 30,000 followers on Twitter to submit a complaint about me. But that's bypassing all
Mm-hmm.
of the usual mechanisms. And it makes me wonder what he would teach his clients about how to resolve their interpersonal differences of opinion with people or workplace colleagues. And it also makes me wonder what kind of world would we be living in, and what would the state of our profession look like if every time a therapist of any kind saw another therapist of any kind post something on the internet that they didn't like, they encouraged thousands of people to report that person to their licensing board. Like,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, that's not a tenable way of solving conflicts. It strikes me as really unprofessional and abusive of the system.
Yeah, it does me as well. And I can't speak to any specific code, but it does sound it if you're going to broadcast that you've made a complaint against somebody, but not even broadcast exactly what the nature of that complaint is. I mean, what is the professional code that you are supposed to have violated that merits a complaint to the licensing board? And so he's not even suggesting that, and then he's soliciting people that don't know you and won't have had an interaction with you to based on hearsay that's incomplete. It's just an implication of something that you've done. I don't know, maybe there was something specific in the tweet. Like you said, you don't have you're not able to view exactly what you said that he's responding to. So I don't know if it's the one that you just read. I don't really see what it is that somebody's supposed to be reporting you for. You're asking a question, you're raising a sort of a half-formed theory, and you're asking for other people's feedback on that. It seems like you're curious in that space. I do know that the internet is a strange place, and these interactions on social media are often really, I mean, we're still figuring out, like in the wake of what happened with Jordan Peterson and the licensing board, and what we've seen with Aaron Kinsvater and his licensing board complaints based on his Twitter profiles and his Twitter follows and comments on Twitter. It's a strange place right now where people are getting reported, and uh, we're using the weight of these professional boards to intimidate people into orthodox speech on their social media platform. And that's a really strange place. But what he's doing seems more questionable than what you are currently being accused of, if I'm reading that correctly.
Yeah. Well, and I want to go there next because I actually filed a complaint against him for this behavior because it's bullying and it's an abuse of his power. It's an abuse of his Twitter following. It's an abuse of his knowledge of the system. But I actually want you to catch me up on Aaron Kinsvater because that name keeps coming up, and I feel like I have a vague recollection that I forwarded emails between people about something going on with him, but I actually can't remember any of the details. So, who is Aaron Kinsvater? What happened to him?
Yeah, if you haven't met Dr. Aaron Kinsvater before, he's a member of CTA, and he's a former counseling educator in Vermont, or Burlington, Vermont. He was a professor, and he now is in private practice, but he had a series of reports made against him by someone who wasn't a client. I may have been a former student, but was not a current student. Had some problems with his viewpoints as expressed on social media, and and reported him to the licensing board, and he was investigated. He was there. He was exonerated, I believe. I think that that case is closed, but the investigation itself was a punishment because it's a very it's a it's a scary place to be as a professional, to have your license being threatened. And the things that he was accused of were just like, there were screenshots of he had followed the wrong accounts. Basically, he was following the
Wow.
wrong people, he was liking the wrong things. I've actually had him on my YouTube channel for a couple of long discussions, and uh, it's if you haven't seen those yet, I highly recommend
I need to
checking those
catch
out.
up.
He's incredibly insightful, and he goes into great detail over what has happened, and his analysis of this entire situation is really brilliant. So I recommend getting it from the horse's mouth if you have the opportunity to speak with him, or if you want to watch those videos. It's
Yeah, I'll
great.
definitely have to catch up and watch those. It makes me think of some other thoughts I've been tweeting out lately about people who want to punish me for having my opinions. And there seems to be this sort of spirit of entitled righteous outrage at me for being a professional who holds these opinions as if that is blasphemous. And I could say
Mhm,
opinions, I could say questions and concerns, I could say observations.
mhm,
Um, but there's sort of this, there's an underlying expectation that comes across in the vitriol that we receive, that it is the duty of a professional to hold a particular opinion on a particular
mhm,
issue, and that opinion has to be dictated by those who are the loudest, most aggressive voices in the room.
mhm,
And I think of it as quite the opposite. I think that as a professional, my responsibility is that if there is a trend happening in my field that I find concerning, I have a responsibility to say something about that.
mhm,
And the implication from the sorts of people who would attack me or you or Aaron Kinswatter is that um, we're punished for thinking freely and for using our professional expertise and our education and experience to say, wait a minute, this something feels fishy about
mhm,
this. And
mhm,
that's why I'll come back to I do stand by what I said. If so as a mental health professional, I'm not a prescriber and I'm not a doctor, but our fields do work in sort of an adjacent way that um, sometimes therapists will refer people to psychiatrists and vice versa. I've also referred people to nutritionists. I've recommended that people get, levels of certain nutrients checked to rule out the role nutritional deficiencies may play. I've recommended that people work with a specialist on a condition like sleep apnea, because
mhm,
if you have sleep apnea and you're not treating it, you're not going to be able to recover from depression, anxiety, or ADHD because your brain isn't recharging at night. So,
mhm,
the mental and physical health components are so adjacent and interwoven. And so while I can't, prescribe like a doctor can, I can make observations that, something like the endocrine system is, of course, going to have a powerful impact on mood and behavior. And that is well known. That is not a contestable fact. To the precise nature of how the endocrine disruption affects mood and behavior, maybe that's contestable. But I
mhm,
think making an observation that, hey, we live in a time that we're giving people these powerful mood and behavior altering drugs, and we actually don't know the long term consequences. We don't know how it's going to influence things like criminality.
mhm,
I mean, actually, to an extent, we do know a little bit. I'm rusty on this, so I'm not, trying to present any of this as fact. But from what I can recall, I read Why Gender Matters by Leonard Sachs, and it was chock full of information. And, from what I recall from the information in that book, giving testosterone to females does increase aggression,
mhm,
whereas giving estrogen to males does not
mhm,
decrease
mhm,
aggression.
mhm,
Um, so yeah, I think there are higher rates of violence against, trans-identified females who are altering their body chemistry, but the patterns, the rates of criminality in males don't change. And again, like I I don't have the study in front of me.
Hmm.
I'm not tied to it, but I also shouldn't be punished for doing my best to understand the research and its implications.
Hmm. And beyond that, whether you have any foundation in understanding these things or not, and you've laid out a good case that you do have some foundational understanding, or at least to make an inquiry. Beyond that, we're seeing something that's unusual when you see a woman commit a mass killing. That's just a very unusual thing. So it makes sense to say what's different, to ask that as just a citizen, just a person. And you're pointing out something that could be a difference and saying, is there something here that we should be examining? And a question that I think is coming up more and more right now in this age of social media sharing is, how much are we allowed to just be people if we are also a licensed professional? How much of ourselves can we display if we are, if we're if we're bound by license, is our tongue bound completely in public life, or are we still allowed to have the freedom to express our opinions the way other non-licensed people are? And so I think that's kind of the crux of this. Like, are you being reported because you are thinking wrong according to your license? And I don't, I think that's a very thin connection anyway, but it seems to be that that's really the only basis for a potential report here.
And a lot of the sort of standards of professional conduct with regard to things you say in public, they came from a time before we had social media.
Mm-hmm.
20 years ago, you were either, I mean, I'm sure there's more gray area than this, but it was much more like you're either famous or you're not. And if you're a
Mm-hmm.
therapist, there's a 99% chance you're not famous,
Mm-hmm.
unless you're one of these sort of brilliant therapists that becomes known for your theories, and then you're known for your theories. Or unless you're like a Dr. Phil, like you're a talk show host. But
Mm-hmm.
but outside of those instances, there we weren't living in a time where people were constantly exchanging viewpoints on all manner of things. And if we are going to open up, if we're going to open that door to say that what a therapist posts on social media or says on a podcast or a YouTube channel with a few thousand subscribers is subject to licensing board complaints, then where do we draw the line? I mean, do we have the same standards? Because now if I had posted on social media and it wasn't April Fool's Day, which is April Fool's Day today, but if I had posted on social media unironically that like I think it's a good idea for therapists to have sex with their clients. The like
Mm-hmm.
classic boundary violation that will lose you your license, or some other like heinous opinion,
Mm-hmm.
or if I'd used like overtly racist language. Now, I mean, people call anything racist these days, but you know what I mean. Something that is really abominable, then I could see that. But if we're just getting into like hotly contested subjects, like right now, our field is very divided over how we conceptualize and treat gender dysphoria. Um, so if we're going to open the door to complaints like Brian Harnsberger's complaint against me,
Mm-hmm.
then where does that stop? And is there any recourse on the other side if I have a concern about, let's say, therapists who would describe themselves as anti-fat phobia.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there are therapists out there that have an ideological worldview that says that the only risk factor associated with being obese is social stigma. That's what accounts for all your problems, right? That obesity itself is not a health risk, that it is you should be celebrated. It's just who you are. You can't change it. You shouldn't be expected to change it. Um, I would say that I have a concern, a legitimate concern that some of those therapists are doing harm, because there might be people coming to them who could live longer, healthier lives, but are being encouraged to engage in self destructive behaviors. So, no, I'm not the sort of person, I'm not going to go and report against all of those therapists because I disagree with them, but
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't refer someone to someone with that ideological bent either. That doesn't mean, and of course my opponents will like straw man me and say that means that I'm fat shaming my clients. No, and that's not what I do either, right? I help people deal with the complexity of having a inner conflict over their relationship with food and exercise in their body and the parts of them that want different things.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're going to open that door to say that a therapist posting something on social media that you disagree with is grounds for a complaint, then which sort of team gets to decide what the rules are? Is
Mm-hmm.
it is
Mm-hmm.
it team blue that holds views that there is such a thing as a child that's born in the wrong body and that there is such a thing as fat phobia that needs to be eradicated from society? Do they get to win the field of therapy? Or, and I'm not on Team Red either. I'm politically independent, politically rather homeless. But, I would say that I'm not on Team Blue's side with regard to those particular issues. I don't believe there is such a thing as a child born in the wrong body, and I believe that telling children that is harmful. And I believe that a therapist should be supportive of their clients being both physically and mentally healthy. And if a therapist is encouraging their clients to do things that are physically unhealthy, then that relies on a foundation of a mind body split that I don't believe in.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that being fat is mentally healthy when alternatives exist, I don't believe in that. The idea that self harming and trying to change your sex and inducing chronic pain and disabilities and a foreshortened lifespan as a result is good for the person, I don't agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
But there are people who want the public to believe that our field is either united and everyone in our field has a certain set of beliefs about what is healthy and what is mentally healthy, and they're all, the beliefs of Team Blue. That either there's no dissent or that everyone who does dissent is a failure as a therapist and a threat to their clients and should lose their license.
Mm-hmm.
I find this very disturbing because I would say one of the things that has made me more moderate in my views is my clinical work. I started off far to the left.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed that when I had clients who maybe I was aligned with politically and they were sort of venting about their frustrations with family members they didn't see eye to eye with politically, I noticed that I was sort of colluding with them. There was
Mm-hmm.
this sort of implicit understanding that like, yeah, we're the right people. We are the correct people on
Mm-hmm.
this matter, and yeah, can you believe how frustrating other people are? They just don't get it. And over time, I started to feel like that was not satisfying my obligation to my clients to help them see people in more nuanced and humane ways and to resolve differences with people they cared about. And then I started getting into moral foundations theory and um, just seeing things through a different lens. And also had clients who maybe I wasn't as aligned with politically, and being their therapist um, obligated me to understand their worldview. So it was these experiences that sort of matured me in my social and political thinking about issues.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that it's just one side of the spectrum with one set of beliefs that's so sure they're right that just gets to decide how therapists should think. I mean, it leaves me very concerned for a lot of clients who aren't going to find good therapists for themselves, who
Mm-hmm.
aren't, they're not going to be able to find therapists that can see the world as they see it. And
Right.
it leaves me concerned for the relationships that those clients have with other people in the world. I mean, if Brian Harnsberger, PsyD of Massachusetts, is modeling to 30,000 people on Twitter
Mm-hmm.
that the correct way to handle a difference is when you get a little blurb that you can read in 30 seconds of what another person thinks, that you should want to, as one of his followers said, change her life. His
Mm.
follower said, let's change her life,
Wow.
right? Like if that's how you're thinking, you're like, I don't know this woman, I've never met her before, But what she wrote that I was able to read in 30 seconds on Twitter was so enraging to me that I
Mm-hmm.
want her livelihood destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how are you a safe person for people to consult with about their relational
Mm-hmm.
difficulties?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, it's just it's such a judgment of you, and if someone is going to be in this line of work, what you hope is that they would be able to try to understand people from lots of different viewpoints and not make judgments like that based on, just a brief first impression of someone, that you would go deeper and be more understanding of the humanity behind that person. So it is a really poor demonstration. And there's a couple of other things that I wanted to kind of pick up on that you said there. One is that you, in talking about the mind body split, as you called it, I thought that was a really interesting way to articulate that. I like the way that you frame that. And you also talked about fat phobia and the new sort of perspective on obesity as only a problem in its potential for social stigma. So these two concepts, the concept that somebody could be born in the wrong body and require medical treatment, the concept that, this concept about fat, are relatively new. And even if I'm just going to stay totally neutral on what I think about these things, they're relatively new ways of looking at the world. And as such, why is the onus not on the people who are supporting the imposition of these concepts into the field? Why is the onus not on them to support those and to engage in dialogue and to convince others that they're correct? Why would they be permitted to be so aggressive with pushing their views? And something else I wanted to ask, from earlier in what you were saying about, you gave an example. What if you had come on social media and, expressed a view about sex with clients, so the licensed counselor having a sex with a client or a sexual relationship? If if you had come on social media and said, "I think this is great. It's a great idea. We should have more of this." I Now that's a really strong statement. But what if you came on social media and you said, "Now what are there is it always a bad thing? Could could we this?" And now that might be a reprehensible viewpoint. Maybe we should say, "Oh, absolutely, like we should all know that that's a bad thing." But it it's I think that's more analogous to what was actually said. It's a question. And what would that, I guess I'm not articulating this perfectly, but would that be grounds for a report against your license? Asking a question about why the ethics are the way that they are? Why do we support this the way that it is? And that's more similar to what you did. You asked a question. You laid out a few things and you asked, what do you think about this? And so I'm just not sure that even if you had framed something that was more classically offensive, to the ethics, to the code of ethics, I don't know that that even would have been grounds for a report against your license. I mean, it might have been like, let's have a discussion with this person because they seem a little confused, but what do you think about that?
I mean, it's when you start getting remotely into the territory of the most egregious boundary violations, it's hard to make a case because people do talk that way about
Hmm.
issues in ways that make them sound really sketchy.
Yeah.
But I hear your point,
Hmm.
right? Which is that I was just raising questions. Now I do have strong opinions on that topic, though.
Hmm.
And you could
Well,
easily find other things I've. Go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah, you do. You have expressed a lot. I just wonder, like, the act of asking a question, is that in and of itself, is that something that would be a reportable offense? And maybe it is,
Right.
maybe it's not. So I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. I'm just wondering out loud about
Mm-hmm.
that because that's pretty much what you did.
Well, there's a few directions I want to go, but I want to pick up on your point that if people are proposing a relatively new and radically different way of approaching an issue, the onus is on them to prove that it works. And that's such an important point. And I've done long tweet threads about this before that this is the way that gender issues are debated in the mental health professional community these days does not resemble our professional standards for disagreement over any other controversial issue. And I've said things actually very similar to what you said, where, normally if within a professional field, a certain group of people is trying to move in a new direction or embrace a new theory, and there are other people who are hanging back, not more politically conservative, but just more conservative in the sense of let's stick with what works and let's
Mm-hmm.
be maybe cautious about new things, then the standard of how I think most professionals have been expected, at least for most of my life, what I've witnessed, and this could be in our field, but it could also be in any other field, is that the people who are proposing the more new and radical thing do have to demonstrate that it works. And the people who are holding back skeptically must be persuaded. And if your new idea really does stand the test of time and stand up to scrutiny, then you embrace your critics because they're asking all the right questions. They're saying, well, what about this? And have you thought about that? And if this were to happen, then what? And if you actually believe in what you're proposing, then you say, I'm so glad you asked that question. We actually did think that through. Or, that is a great question and we don't have all the answers yet, and we should do more studies on that. Right? But that's how professional disagreement is supposed to go. The liberal and conservative, not in the sense of politically liberal and conservative, but basically those who are quicker to embrace novelty and change, and break down new frontiers, and those who are more rooted in tradition and more sort of driven by their need for security. Those two forces work in opposition in a way that helps all of society, because we do need both. We need people to venture out and try new things, and we need people who are rooted in what already works. And together, the new and old can form new things that stand up to scrutiny and stand up to the test of time. So we need both of those forces. And part of my issue with how our field has been handling gender stuff is that there are people who are proposing things that are really novel and really radical and just depart in some major ways from a lot of foundational principles that many other things rest on. And they're saying, this is just the way it is now, and if you disagree, we're coming for your heads on platters.
Mm-hmm.
And and that voice, the voice of people like me holding back, going, wait a minute, what about this, that, and the other? It's not appreciated. It's not seen as an opportunity to demonstrate that their ideas hold water.
Mm-hmm.
And that, that raises more suspicions. Like, well, what are you so afraid of? And what are you hiding?
Mm-hmm.
What makes you feel like you need to go to that length of trying to destroy my reputation, my licensure, my livelihood, my credibility? What makes you feel like you need to do that just because I'm saying I'm not sure your ideas are going to work?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's a good point. I mean, it is an extreme take, and it would do more for their argument if they could stand and hold a discussion. So,
And that was another thing that I did end up tweeting about this issue. It was Dr. Roger McFillin had tweeted something about how he welcomes voices of disagreement to come on his podcast, and his timing of tweeting that was perfect. I quote tweeted it and I said, you know what, me too, and I've done that, and that's one of the things that makes it so tragic that this therapist in Massachusetts decided to jump to an extreme because he saw something on Twitter that he didn't like. Is
mm-hmm.
I actually, if he had reached out to me
Mm-hmm.
in a kind and professional manner, in a manner that showed maturity, and said, hey, I could be misunderstanding you here. After all, you're a stranger and I just found a tweet. But I think you're suggesting this. And if so, I find that concerning. Can we talk? I would have been like, come on my podcast. Let's have a debate. And I would hope that having, a doctoral degree, having PsyD after your name, putting yourself forward as a source of beyond mastery in the subject of psychology. And, as a therapist, you should be able to have all kinds of difficult conversations. Like, if therapists can't have difficult conversations, who the hell can? Like, I need to see that our field knows how to deal with this because life requires difficult conversations and someone's got to be good at it. So, you know, I feel like I've
Yeah.
a lot of run-on sentences that I haven't completed, but you see where I'm going with that.
I do see where you're going, and the fact that you're willing and interested in engaging at a deeper than superficial level with the concerns that he might have about your opinions and your concerns about what his opinions might be, and all the substance beneath all of those. And something I'm curious about is you have been very vocal, and you've made your thoughts about these things really public, and you've had some other experiences with people attacking you for your viewpoints and for your statements. Does that get easier? Do, do you feel intimidated by it to the point where it makes you want to stop or back off? And what is that like to continue to put yourself out there with your opinions in the public despite some of the nastiness that you receive?
It's a good question. I don't know if it gets easier because I've yet to have to go through the exact same thing again. Like, definitely when there's some kind of pile on, it does really affect my stress level. Um, and, with this situation, I don't know what'll come of it. I do want to show you the complaint that I made against him. It's my first time actually submitting a complaint against another therapist. But I don't know if my board will do anything. I mean, so my previous investigation was a combination of a bunch of people on Twitter coming after me for my blog and one woman who attended one session of my parent support group, and quickly flipped after that group from like very sweet, innocuous emails about getting into the group to like pages and pages and pages of nasty emails and like leaving, like, telling my assistant, do not have Stephanie ever contact me again after sending me all these pages of nasty emails that I didn't reply to. Then going after saying she didn't want to ever hear from me again, going to my blog, subscribing to my blog, leaving nasty comments on every single blog post. Of course, I moderate those, so I'm able to remove them. And then finding my one of my resource lists and contacting, I don't know if she contacted everyone on my resource list, but she certainly contacted multiple people on my resource list with whom I didn't even say this person's my best friend and they endorse everything I do. I was just like, you should read their articles. And, went to the extreme of, telling people that I'm so horrible they shouldn't even want to be on my resource list of things I recommend to people. And so, I leave it to the observer to decide what type of behavior this is. I describe it as cluster B behavior. And, there aren't too many people who are of sound and mature psychological functioning who do that sort of thing in general. So this person came after me and left a nasty board complaint. And it was the combination of people attacking me on Twitter and this one person who was technically a client because she came to one group session. But again, everything that ever happened with her was in front of other people. She was part of a group, and other people who were in that group did not have that same experience as she did. And, she ended up bringing other people from the group into the investigation. The investigator ended up contacting other people from the group, and they came to my defense. So, I don't know if another complaint that's, again, just a bunch of random people on Twitter complaining that they don't like my tweets. I don't know if that's going to do it, if they're going to be like, oh, this again. Yeah, because I warned them. The first time people came after me on Twitter, I warned the board, you will be receiving these complaints and here's what happened. And so I don't know how I'll feel if I have to go through that again, but I definitely go back and forth. And, something I want to talk to you about probably more privately when you have time for that is like your thought process on being a therapist versus being a coach. Because when I think about just focusing on coaching or consulting work, and I do consulting work at this point, it's just not my whole practice. I have a small therapy practice, I have a small consulting practice, and then I do a lot of other things, my podcast, affirmation generation, everything.
Mhm.
But when I think about, I do think about taking a break from therapy
Mhm.
because I'm not happy with the direction the field is going and because I'm tired of things like this impacting me.
Mhm.
And, something you said earlier was you were talking about counselors' abilities to be human. And from there, we went into a discussion of specifically being human and stating your opinions on the internet.
Mhm.
But I'm curious for you, Leslie, because you've made the decision to just do coaching work for now. And I know that was partly influenced by what happened at Antioch.
Mhm.
But what are your thoughts on sort of coaching and consulting versus therapy and the sort of freedom to be human and to not worry about this sort of thing?
Well, it's a big topic, and there's definitely pros and cons involved in making that decision. The cons, professional networking is different. The status that comes with the licensure, the ability to bill insurance, the ability to be in certain professional networks where you can receive referrals, and there's a host of reasons to get licensed that you lose when you choose to be unregulated. But choosing to work in a similar field in a similar way with your clients, but from an unregulated, unlicensed, unmedicalized perspective has its advantages as well. And I really like the freedom to sort of create the relationships in a more fluid way. I'm more of a process partner. It's more peer to peer. I don't feel like I'm coming into my client relationships with the attitude of I'm the expert and I'm evaluating and assessing you and diagnosing you. It's just very different. And I do feel more free to be a person in that way. But again, I guess I'm not really. I call my channel the Radical Center. I do tend to fall into the center on a lot of things. I don't tend to have very extreme or polarized opinions about a lot of things, and I am not. I'm. I am more of an open-minded. I want to hear where other people are coming from. I want to reserve judgment. And so I'm not one that's really out there putting a lot of big opinions out there. I'm just asking a lot of questions. And when I see something that seems irrational and authoritarian, I want to push back on that and ask about where that's coming from. So I'm not necessarily using social media for that kind of thing myself, but I do feel like I'm more free to do that because I don't have the weight of a license hanging over my head. You can't really threaten me with anything that would change my career. I could irritate my clients and they could walk away if they didn't like something that I said, but that's something that every counselor has to deal with. And it is different. I mean, it's a different thing when you're doing coaching or consulting versus counseling. It's a different package that the patient is receiving in terms of benefits and drawbacks as well. It's not, I don't have patients, I have clients. And so it's a big topic. I mean, we could spend easily an hour just discussing that alone, but it's, I've been happy with that decision for myself for now.
Hmm. Yeah, I definitely want to chat privately with you about that. And I'm aware of the limited time, so I want to make sure to at least kind of cover the rest of the story of what happened with this attack on my license. So let me do a screen share again. Um, all right, so going back over here. So this is where it started. Um, and then actually, let me go here. So I decided to submit a complaint to his licensing board. I'm going to make this larger so it's easier for people to read. Um, and I've never done this before, but here's what I wrote. On March 28th, 2023, Brian Harnsberger PsyD sought to abuse the power of his internet following on Twitter and of professional licensing boards to hurt me. I have no previous relationship with this person or any history of interacting with him whatsoever, and we live on opposite sides of the country. He apparently saw something I tweeted that he disliked, and rather than A, letting the issue go, or B, raising his concerns directly and privately with me in a professional manner, he first blocked me on Twitter, then weaponized his following of 30,000 plus people by suggesting that they should mass report me to my licensing board. Although I am not familiar with the particular laws governing the practice of clinical psychology in Massachusetts, it is a general ethical principle in our counseling profession that if you have a concern about a colleague's behavior, you approach that colleague in a private and professional manner before escalating the issue. It seems to me an abuse of his power, social media following, and general knowledge of the licensure system to bypass the usual process and seek to harass and intimidate a colleague in such a cowardly, hysterical, and unprofessional manner. I would not normally do such a thing to a colleague. Normally, when I see something on the internet that I dislike or disagree with from someone in the counseling profession, I simply ignore it or respectfully disagree. I do not wish to sink to his level. However, I do believe that there should be consequences for his actions, so I am submitting a complaint. And I linked to the tweet, and I also provided some screenshots in case he deleted it. He did shortly thereafter not only block me, but he locked his account. I might not have shared this before. This is some of the comments that had come in from people, him encouraging them to so-called change my life and so on. And then I just want to share what else happened. So after I reported him for his exact behavior, which is bullying and harassment and a misuse of power, he said, "Hi, lawyers of Twitter. Do I have a case of slander here?" Hashtag therapist Twitter. I'm sure he meant hashtag lawyer Twitter or whatever. But basically, someone sent him a screenshot of what I had posted, which is just, I was just being very transparent about the whole thing. He picked a fight with me. You expect me to not defend myself? You pick a fight with me, I'm going to defend myself. So he basically just included a screenshot and asked if he had a case of slander. And I thought that took an incredible amount of gall and was a classic case of DARVO, the acronym that stands for Deny, Attack, Reverse Victim and Offender. So denying what he did, attacking me, and reversing victim and offender. He started a fight. I had no reason to slander him. I had no reason to attack him. He came out of the blue one day and decided that he was going to attack me. He didn't like things I posted on the internet. Those things were not directed at him. They were not directed at anybody. They didn't indicate anything about my inability to provide good care to my clients. There was nothing about patient care in there. In fact, I think it shows a concern that, if we're giving people mood-altering substances, that's something we should pay attention to. And so, yeah, he started this whole thing, and then I transparently said, I will defend myself, and I took this course of action. And he accused me of slander. So who knows what's happening next? Now, I don't think he has a case because slander is, making inaccurate statements and
No.
and I try to put myself in the head of someone at a licensing board. And of course, we're dealing with two different boards. We're dealing with a bunch of random people on the internet submitting more complaints to the Oregon board. And then we're dealing with his Massachusetts board. But I think which is a greater offense? Receiving a report that someone posted something on the internet I don't like about a controversial issue that doesn't pertain directly to the quality of care they're providing to their patients, or finding out that a licensee has been a bully on the internet and has encouraged people to misuse these systems that are designed to protect consumers. And obviously I'm biased, but, even when I try to look at it from a distance, I really think that his behavior is the more egregious and concerning, and that he should have thought this through before he had the audacity to attack me like this. And maybe now he's feeling a little bit of what I've felt for the last year and a half since this stuff started first happening to me. And maybe he should be a little bit more humble and modest about abiding by some sort of standards of professional behavior in our field.
Well, yeah, first of all, I think he would be accusing you of libel and not slander because it was written. And secondly, your statement is just a description of what he did and how you feel like it was bad for you. I mean, it's pretty clear cut. So I don't think that he has any, you haven't done any reputational damage just by calling him out and saying, hey, what you did to me wasn't cool. And even reporting that. But what he did to you was different. And I still am unclear of exactly what code he believes you violated. And I think that that's a question that I don't know if you can really know that without his seeing the tweet that he was trying to call out, but what exactly does he think that you violated? And I do agree, the bullying and the harassment on his part, there's a lot more subjectivity going on. You're calling him out as more objective and more straightforward. So that's how that makes sense to me.
Um, yeah. I feel like I don't know, it's been such a roller coaster this week from
Mm-hmm.
like receiving because my day started with that a few days ago. I think it was
Mm-hmm.
Wednesday. Because I think the tweet that I made that went viral, I tweeted on Monday. And then Tuesday is when Brian made his tweet. And Wednesday morning, I woke up to my DMs with screenshots. And I'm dealing with a very severe chronic illness. It's been over a year. I'm doing some really intensive treatments to try to get better.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's like my new part-time job in addition to all the other things I do is I have to do these intensive treatments, but I definitely went on a roller coaster with that for a little while and then I caught my breath and after submitting that complaint back, I did feel somewhat vindicated. I felt like
Mm-hmm.
a little bit like the way I felt when I was being bullied and then someone came to my defense
Mm-hmm.
because I really do I see this as a case of bullying. And I'm sure he doesn't see himself as a bully. He probably sees himself as a very righteous person, but I just
Mm-hmm.
keep thinking back to this time that someone asked Jordan Peterson what he views as the greatest threat to I don't know if it was the greatest threat to Western civilization, but something along those lines, and he said narcissistic compassion.
Hmm.
And I just keep thinking back to that because that's exactly what this is, this glib, smug, prideful behavior that there are these people who just are so sure they're on the right side of history when they go on the attack against people like you and me.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, these are the same people who are, spouting off about checking your biases,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but they have such huge blind spots with regard to their biases. He didn't stop to think for a moment about my humanity or what path might have led me to having these questions and concerns. But some of the things I tweeted about this were like, this isn't a concern for the care of my patients. I work with people who someone like this clearly is not going to work with. Detransitioners and parents who are worried about their kids being potentially medicalized for life. These are people who can't
Mm-hmm.
find other help in our field. And the idea that there are people in our field who are so self righteous about their beliefs that they don't want people who are suffering to have good care, that
Mm-hmm.
they would rather a therapist like me not be able to practice than that I be able to help people who think differently than them or who have had personal life experiences that disconfirm their cherished beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
It's really sad. I would say that I felt a lot of sadness this week, actually. Like after the initial storm of stress, I just felt really sad about the state of the world and the state of our field and what things have come to.
Mm-hmm. And I can understand that sadness, especially when you're being mobbed online and having a bunch of people and seeing what they say about you and getting the constant notifications and seeing what's being said. And that I wonder about how healthy it is to be on platforms like Twitter at all. I mean I've kind of dipped my foot into the water with Twitter, and I still have a pretty small account, small following. I haven't been trying to really do much with it, and I'm not sure. I mean, I've got one foot out the door still. I could just pull the plug on it if it gets nasty because I it's such a bizarre space. It just encourages dehumanization and these there was this conversation that I kind of got involved in on there like a week or so ago, and I people kept on liking and retweeting and then commenting to something I had said, and somebody was asking me questions wanting to know more, and but it was more in a challenging way, like being kind of offended by something that I had said and sort of challenging it. And I thought I could sit here and type out little short bullets for some stranger online and spend a whole lot of my time engaging in this one little rabbit hole, this one little thing, or I can just let this go. And I just let
Yeah.
it go. I'm just like, this, there's no point. You're not going to ever really hear the substance of my thoughts on this issue in these tiny little snippets anyway. And you're already oriented towards disliking me, so you're just going to shoot holes in whatever I say anyway. So it's this really bizarre form of communication that I'm pretty sure I think is more unhealthy than beneficial.
Well, you've had the sort of amazing fortune of like you didn't even intend to have a following. You just got on YouTube to talk about what was happening at Antioch. And it was like you thought it was going to be very transient, and now here you are, like you have all these people coming to you, and you've started a community, and 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 you did all that without getting on Twitter. And I really congratulate you, Leslie. I think you're just such a voice of reason. And it's good to have you on Twitter because I could tag you and things every now and then. But I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
For me, it's been a really valuable resource, and
Mhm.
I block people. I block people so easily, and I've posted this, like there was a detransitioner who just joined Twitter and who was like, I'm not sure how this works and why are so many people following me, and I just shared some tips on Twitter. I'm like, remember, nobody's paying you to be here. You're here of your own free will on your own time. There's no this app feel your heart is in your stomach if
Mhm.
that's what you came here for. So I think it's really petty, even when people I agree with on a lot of issues, when they criticize other people for using the block feature. I'm
Mhm.
like, no, it's wise to use the block feature unless you're like official. Like if you're like a fucking senator and you block someone, that's not a good look. But aside from that, it's wise to curate your experience, and I do try to do that. And for the most part, I've been able to go kind of longer stretches of time without any drama and just get what I'm there for on Twitter. But then things like this happen. And yeah, it definitely question the utility of any of it. But I'm aware of your time. I know you have. Really appreciate you just jumping on here at the last minute with me, and it's good to see you again.
Yeah, it's nice to see you too, and thanks for sharing the story of what's going on. And I hope having the opportunity to talk about it helps process what's going on for you because it's a big deal. And I just appreciate your forthrightness and transparency with what this experience has been like for you. So thanks for bringing me into the conversation.
Yeah, and remind people where they can find you. I know you recently started Solid Ground as well, which is an online community for.
Yeah,
Can
it's
you just describe all that?
yeah, sure. It's an online peer support community for people who are struggling with authoritarian ideologies in their workplace, school, family, home life. It's something I started with three colleagues with Jennifer Friend, Jody Shaw, and David Simpson, and we host groups every week, and we have message boards available also. So you can find us at solidgroundsupport.com, and then I have a YouTube channel at the Radical Center. So I also have that on some podcast apps, but it's mostly an interview project, mostly conversations with other people. But Solid Ground, we do a live stream every week on Mondays, so join us for that. And I have Christine Stephen on regularly as a guest for live streams. So those are always I really enjoy those conversations and all the people I get
My
to talk to.
conversation with Christine is coming out Monday.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to seeing that. She's wonderful.
And for anyone who is tuning into this but didn't already know this, I've been on Leslie's channel and she's been on mine. And so it's good to know there are people doing great work, and I'm going to have to check out your community a little bit more. I've been enjoying tuning into the live streams when I can.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks, Leslie. I'll talk to you later.
All right. Thanks, Stephanie.
Bye.
Bye.